For decades, the American middle class was, well, the bedrock of the whole country's economy and its social stability. But somewhere along the way, something really broke. Now, this isn't a story about one single thing happening. It's about a long, interconnected chain of events that slowly, piece by piece, reshaped an entire nation. In this explainer, we're going to trace that chain, link by link. And it really all boils down to this one fundamental question. You know that idea that if you just work hard and play by the rules, you can get ahead? That feels more and more distant for millions of people. So what happened to that promise of a stable, prosperous life? Okay, let's get into it.
To really understand how that promise got broken, we first have to understand what it looked like when it was actually working. And for that, we've got to go back in time, to the decades right after World War II.
For a whole generation, the formula was pretty simple, and you know what? It delivered. As the American economy boomed, so did the fortunes of its workers. A single income could often support a family, you could buy a home, and you could actually secure a comfortable retirement. It was this predictable path to a good life. But then, a fundamental connection just snapped. Starting around the 1970s, a huge shift happened, something economists now call the Great Decoupling. The engine of the economy, it kept roaring ahead, but the benefits, they just stopped flowing to workers in the same way. That link between a growing economy and a growing paycheck for the average person was fundamentally broken.
This slide right here, this is the heart of the problem. On the left, you see worker productivity, basically how much stuff an average worker creates, and it's just soaring after the 1970s. But then you look to the right and you see their wages, completely flat. The economic pie was getting way bigger, but the slice for the people actually baking it just stopped growing. So, where did all that new wealth go? Well, the answer lies in something called the wage share. All that means is it's the slice of the whole economic pie that goes to workers. And as you can see, it started to shrink. So instead of going into paychecks, a bigger and bigger portion of the nation's income started flowing to capital. We're talking corporate profits, returns for investors. This was a total rewiring of who gets to benefit from a growing economy.
Now, this decoupling, it didn't just happen in a vacuum. It kicked off a massive chain reaction, where one thing triggered the next, and each link in that chain weakened the economic foundation of the middle class. So let's walk through the first part of that chain.
It all kicks off with globalization. As companies started moving production overseas where costs were lower, those stable, high-paying manufacturing jobs, the absolute backbone of the middle class, they started to disappear. This directly weakened labor unions, which for decades had fought for better wages and benefits. With fewer members and way less influence, the collective bargaining power of the average worker just collapsed.
And this right here shows you the result. The whole economy rebalanced itself. We basically traded manufacturing jobs that came with pensions and healthcare and stability for service sector jobs that were often lower paying, way less stable, and had fewer, if any, benefits. The very foundation of what it meant to have a middle-class job was fundamentally changed. But look, stagnating wages, that was only part of the story. While the core engine of middle-class prosperity was sputtering, you had these other powerful forces acting like accelerants, basically pouring fuel on the fire and turning a growing problem into a full-blown crisis. And here's a really crucial point. This wasn't just some inevitable economic trend. It was actively shaped by policy. Decisions made in Washington, things like tax cuts that mostly benefited the wealthy, or deregulation of the financial industry, they really tilted the playing field. And at the same time, the social safety nets and job retraining programs that could have helped workers adapt to this new world, they just didn't keep up. This all led to the rise of what you could call two separate economies. On one side, you've got the asset economy, where wealth comes from owning things, stocks, property, investments. And on the other side, you have the wage economy, where you earn your money from a job. As financial markets boomed and asset prices soared, the economy began to reward owning capital way more than it rewarded earning a wage, and that just dramatically widened the wealth gap. Then, technology added another layer of pressure. Automation and computers didn't just get rid of some jobs, they changed the entire shape of the job market. This process, which folks call job polarization, basically hollowed out the middle. Demand for high-skill, high-paid jobs grew, and so did demand for low-skill, low-pay service jobs. But those middle-skill, middle-income jobs, the ones that held up the middle class, they started to evaporate. So you've got this perfect storm, right? Wages are flat, and the good jobs are harder to find.
But the story gets worse, because at the exact same time, the costs for the absolute cornerstones of a middle-class life, we're talking education, healthcare, and a home, they just began to skyrocket. First up, education. A college degree went from being this golden ticket to the middle class to being a massive financial ball and chain. As tuition costs just soared way past inflation, a whole generation got saddled with crippling student debt, forcing them to delay huge life milestones like buying a home or starting a family.
Then you've got healthcare. Costs have absolutely ballooned, and they become a source of constant financial anxiety for millions. As those stable employer-provided benefits became less and less common, a single unexpected illness could suddenly mean financial ruin. I mean, wiping out decades of savings in an instant.
And finally, housing. The very foundation of building middle-class wealth became a key driver of inequality. In cities all across the country, home prices totally detached from what local wages could possibly support. This put the dream of homeownership out of reach for so many, and put immense financial pressure on renters, who saw more and more of their stagnant paychecks just eaten up by rent.
Now, all this immense economic pressure, it didn't just stay in people's bank accounts. It started to bleed into the political system, and it created this dangerous feedback loop that makes the underlying problems even harder to solve.
I mean, it makes sense, right? When people feel like the system is no longer working for them, they lose faith in institutions. This financial anxiety is a powerful driver of the political anger, the division, and the populism that have really come to define our current era.
And this creates a really vicious cycle. The economic pressure fuels political gridlock. That gridlock prevents the kind of big, long-term reforms we need to fix things like education or healthcare. And because those problems don't get fixed, the economic pressure on the middle class just keeps growing, starting the whole cycle all over again.
So after decades of this decline and a system that seems totally stuck in this negative feedback loop, we have to ask the critical question: can this chain be repaired? Is this whole trend even reversible?
If there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. The hollowing out of the middle class wasn't like a sudden earthquake. It was more like a slow erosion, the result of countless choices and changes piling up over half a century. It wasn't inevitable, and that means its continuation isn't inevitable either.
Because the causes are such a complex web, the solutions would likely have to be a whole mix of policies, each targeting different links in that chain. We're talking about things like reforming the tax code, making huge investments in modern job training, tackling the runaway costs of healthcare and housing, and finding ways to rebalance the power between workers and employers. The path forward is not simple, and it requires a level of political agreement that's really hard to find these days.
And all of that leaves us with the ultimate question. In this long, complex chain of cause and effect that we've just walked through, if you could start by repairing just one single link to make the biggest possible difference, where would you even begin?